Before you could write, before you had a government, before you even had a wheel, you built. Every human civilization that has ever existed on this planet has left behind buildings. Not always by choice, not always intentionally, but they did it anyway. And in those buildings, their temples, their tombs, their markets, their homes, they left us something incredible. A record, a fingerprint of who they were, what they believed, what they feared, and what they were capable of. Architecture isn't just about pretty buildings. It's the most honest thing a society ever makes. And today, we're going all the way back to the beginning. Welcome to Archiwanda, the channel where we get completely obsessed with the history of the built world. I'm Eric, and if you're new here, this is the place to be if you've ever looked at an old building and thought, who made this? Why does it look like that? What were they thinking? Today, we're kicking off what's going to be an ongoing series, a full history of architecture from the very first human shelters all the way through to the present day. This is part one, so we're starting at the absolute beginning. Let's get into it. The story of architecture begins not with a blueprint, but with a body trying to stay warm. The earliest human shelters, going back roughly 400,000 years, were adaptations of natural spaces, caves, overhangs, rocky outcroppings. But here's the thing that often gets overlooked. Even in using these spaces, early humans modified them. They blocked openings with stones or hides. They organized interior space. They made choices. And that act of deliberate spatial organization? That's where architecture begins. Around 300,000 to 400,000 years ago, we start seeing evidence of constructed shelters. Not just found spaces, but made ones. Post holes in the ground, suggesting wooden frames. Stone rings that once held down animal skin walls. But the site that genuinely rewrites our understanding of early architecture is Göbekli Tepe in modern-day Turkey. Dating to around 9,600 BCE, that's over 11,000 years ago. This is a complex of massive carved stone pillars arranged in circular enclosures, decorated with animals and abstract symbols. Here's why that matters. Göbekli Tepe predates agriculture. The people who built it were hunter-gatherers. For decades, the accepted story was that humans settled down, started farming, then built monuments. Göbekli Tepe flips that completely. It suggests that the desire to build something monumental, something sacred, may have actually driven settlement. The building came first. The city followed. Architecture didn't follow civilization. Architecture created it. Then there's Stonehenge, built in phases from around 3000 to 1500 BCE in what is now Wiltshire, England. The famous stone circle is actually the last stage of a much longer building project. And those massive sarsen stones, some weighing up to 25 tons, were transported from Marlborough Downs, roughly 25 miles away. The blue stones came from Wales, nearly 200 miles. These weren't accidents. They weren't random. They were oriented deliberately. The main axis aligns with the rising sun at the summer solstice. This is architecture as calendar, as cosmology, as a machine for connecting the earthly to something beyond it. Now we move into what historians call the cradle of civilization, Mesopotamia, the land between the Tigris and Euphrates rivers in what is now Iraq, Syria, and parts of Turkey. And here, from around 3,500 BCE onwards, we see something genuinely new: cities. And with cities, architecture as a profession. The Sumerians were the first great builders of Mesopotamia, and they worked primarily in mud brick. The region had no stone, no timber in abundance. What it had was river clay. So that's what they built with, and they built extraordinarily well. The defining architectural form of Mesopotamia is the ziggurat, a massive stepped temple tower rising above the flat plain like an artificial mountain. The ziggurat of Ur, built around 2100 BCE under King Ur-Nammu, is one of the best preserved examples. 3 massive terraces, each set back from the one below, leading to a temple at the summit accessible only by staircases and only by priests. Why a mountain? Because in Mesopotamian religion, the gods lived on mountaintops. These were riverine people, living on a flat floodplain. They had no mountains, so they built them. This is the key principle I want you to hold on to throughout this entire series. Architectural form follows belief. The shape of a building tells you what the people who made it believed about the universe, about power, about the divine. Mesopotamia also gives us the world's first recorded architect by name. His name was Gudea, a ruler of the city-state of Lagash around 2140 BCE, who oversaw extensive temple construction and left detailed inscriptions describing the building process, including receiving the plans in a dream from the god Ningirsu. Even the first architect claimed divine inspiration. Some things don't change. Later, Babylon under Nebuchadnezzar II, around 600 BCE, takes Mesopotamian architecture to its most extravagant. The Ishtar Gate, now partially reconstructed in the Pergamon Museum in Berlin, was a monumental gateway into the city covered in glazed lapis blue bricks, with golden lions, dragons, and bulls. It was one of the most visually stunning things in the ancient world. And the city itself, with its great processional way, its walls wide enough for chariots to pass each other on top, was an act of propaganda as much as architecture. Babylon was built to make you feel small. If Mesopotamia built for the gods, Egypt built for forever. Egyptian architecture is defined by one extraordinary obsession: permanence. The Egyptians built their temples and tombs in stone because they believed the afterlife was real, and the structures that would house the dead, or the divine, needed to last as long as the universe itself. Their mud brick homes? Gone. Their stone temples and tombs? Still standing after 4,000 years. That's not an accident. That's a philosophy expressed in material. Let's start with the obvious: the pyramids. The Step Pyramid of Djoser at Saqqara, built around 2650 BCE and designed by the architect Imhotep, one of the first named architects in history, marks a turning point. Before Imhotep, Egyptian royal tombs were flat-roofed rectangular structures called mastabas. Imhotep stacked mastabas on top of each other, getting progressively smaller to create a stepped tower of stone. It was the first large-scale cut stone structure in history. Within about 80 years, Egyptian builders had refined the pyramid form into what we know from Giza. The Great Pyramid of Khufu, built around 2560 BCE, stood for over 3,800 years as the tallest man-made structure on Earth. It contains approximately 2.3 million stone blocks, some weighing up to 80 tons. The precision is almost absurd. The four sides align to the cardinal directions, with an accuracy of less than 0.1 degrees. How? The honest answer is, we're still not entirely sure. We have good theories: worker camps, ramps, sledges, astronomical alignment techniques, but no single definitive explanation. The pyramids remain the most compelling unsolved problem in architectural history. But pyramids are only one part of the Egyptian architectural story. The temples are just as extraordinary, and in many ways, more interesting. The Temple of Karnak at Luxor, built over roughly 2,000 years from around 2055 BCE to 100 BCE, is not a single building, but a vast complex, the largest religious building ever constructed. It was added to by almost every pharaoh, each one trying to outdo their predecessors. The most jaw-dropping space within it is the Great Hypostyle Hall, a forest of 134 massive columns, some reaching 23 meters tall, covered floor to ceiling in hieroglyphic carvings. Walking through it, you would have experienced a compression and release of space. The columns so densely packed that you couldn't see the end of the hall, the light filtering in from above through stone clerestory windows. That's not accidental. That's spatial drama. That's architecture being used to induce awe. Egyptian temples also introduced a formal vocabulary that echoes through all of Western architecture. The axis, a central processional route leading deeper into the sacred space. The pylon, a monumental gateway tapering towards the top. Obelisks flanking entrances. Columns as structural and symbolic elements. When you walk into a grand civic building today and feel that sense of procession, of moving through increasing formality towards something important, you're feeling an idea that was first worked out on the banks of the Nile. Here's something Western architectural history often gets wrong. Egypt and Mesopotamia weren't the only places where sophisticated architecture was happening. At exactly the same time, on the other side of the world, two other civilizations were doing something remarkable, and in some ways, more advanced. The Indus Valley civilization, centered on cities like Mohenjo-daro and Harappa in what is now Pakistan and northwest India, flourished from around 2600 to 1900 BCE. And their urban planning was, frankly, astonishing. Mohenjo-daro was a city of around 40,000 people, laid out on a precise grid plan. Straight streets intersecting at right angles, oriented to the cardinal directions. Standardized fired brick, the same module used across the entire civilization, from Afghanistan to Gujarat. A sophisticated drainage system running beneath the streets with covered sewers, inspection hatches, and connections to almost every house. This is a city with better sanitation infrastructure than most European cities 3,000 years later. The Indus Valley people were solving urban engineering problems we wouldn't see solved again at that scale until the Romans. And yet we still can't read their script. We don't know what they called themselves, what their rulers were called, or why their civilization collapsed around 1900 BCE. Their architecture survives. Their story doesn't. At least, not yet. Meanwhile, in China, from around 2000 BCE and codified under the Shang and Zhou dynasties, a completely distinct architectural tradition was developing, one based on timber framing. Where Egyptian and Mesopotamian builders worked in stone and mud brick, Chinese builders developed sophisticated joinery in wood. The dugong bracket system, interlocking wooden brackets that distribute the load of a heavy roof, was so precisely engineered that buildings could flex during earthquakes rather than crumble. No nails, no glue, pure interlocking geometry. This tradition, the heavy curved roof, the raised platform base, the timber column, becomes the defining visual language of East Asian architecture for millennia. From Japan to Korea to Vietnam, the architectural DNA traces back to these early Chinese experiments in wood. Different materials, different climate, different beliefs, completely different architecture. Same fundamental human drive to make a place that means something. So, we've covered an enormous amount of ground, from the very first deliberate shelters to some of the most ambitious buildings ever constructed. In part 2, we're going to take a huge leap forward into ancient Greece and Rome, because this is where Western architecture as we understand it really begins. We're talking the orders of architecture, the column, the arch, the dome, ideas so powerful that architects are still arguing about them today. If this video gave you something to think about, hit the subscribe button, because part 2 is one you genuinely don't want to miss. Thanks for watching ArchiWonder. This is what we do here. We take buildings seriously. Because buildings take us seriously. I'll see you in part 2.